Hello, everyone.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be jazz. I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, I'm no qua, Osinachi. One lemon, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi. Hello, can everyone hear me in the room? Ono, can you hear me? James, you can hear me. Bodhi, you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Dear conference hosts, can you also hear me? Please, we cannot be recorded. That's really an issue. We can only be streamed. So if you would just switch the recording off, that would be extremely helpful. Thanks a lot. We only have 2 more minutes to go, so I'm not sure who's in the room. We do have a bit of a problem because we are being recorded and we can't have this because of copyright issues with the film. So I would very much appreciate if the conference hosts, whoever's behind, you know, the screen, would be kind enough to, you know, stop the recording. Okay, there will be many clips, dear conference session organizer. So you will have to stop the recording pretty often because we'll be showing snippets of the film. So I'm okay being recorded, and then when I tell you to stop the recording, you know, then that would be good. I mean, I hope this is going to work. And I think I'm just going to share my screen. I do hope that this is going to work now. Okay. So let me see whether I can. So I hope you're all able now to see the screen. And I would like to start. Sorry for this kind of slightly difficult start. I hope you can all hear me. I would like to welcome you to this session on the construction of the everyday in the German-Nigerian television production Taiwo Shango from 1965. My name is Christine Matzke. I teach at the University of Bayreuth. And it's a great pleasure for me to share this panel with some very distinguished speakers. I would like to say a little bit about our group because we all work on a collaborative short-term research project jointly hosted by the University of Lagos and the University of Bayreuth. And we are hoping that with this panel and the way we've structured it, that we are also reflecting the way we're working together, because we sometimes work collaboratively as a team, but then we also do our own thing. So basically what you're going to see today are 3 papers that follow a similar pattern, because the speakers will show clips and then they will speak to the clips, you know, from that film, and in relation, of course, to the conference overall conference theme. And I will be giving an introduction and some background to the film. So let me introduce the speakers in the order of appearance. The first speaker will be Onokoma Okoma, who I don't think I need to introduce as anybody else on this panel but me. Onokoma is a pioneer in Nollywood studies, and he's a professor of Anglophone and literature and cinema in the Department of English and Film Studies at the University of Alberta. And he will be speaking on the everyday and the ritual later on. The second speaker will be Dr. James Gibbs, who you all know as a specialist on Wole Soyinka and Ghanaian theatre. He's taught at universities in Ghana, Malawi, Nigeria, and Belgium, and in the UK before retiring from teaching in 2007, but he's obviously not retired from research. So I welcome you to the room, James. The third speaker, Lekan Balogun, who's our colleague at the University of Lagos, was here in Bayreuth, and some circumstances have forced him to return on very short notice to Lagos. So he might still be airborne, so we will not have his presentation today. We've left the clip in. There was no time to record his presentation, which I'm very sorry about, but I hope that he'll be able to, present his work at another occasion. And then last but certainly not least, a speaker will be Professor Bode Omojola, who's a composer and award-winning scholar and Hammond Douglas Five College Professor of Music at Mount Holyoke College and the Five College Consortium in Massachusetts. And he will be speaking on music. So what is this film about, and why is it so difficult to show the film? Because we do have copyright issues. I can only repeat it again and again. Taiwo Shango, with a subtitle Der zweite Tag nach dem Tod, the second day after the death, is introduced at the beginning of a film in the voiceover as a story, or a film that tells the story of the friendship between a European and an African, which ends in unhappiness without either one being to blame. It also tells the difference between the pictures of God which man constructs for himself. So who made that film? The film was written and directed by Klaus Stephan, whom you can see here to the left. Klaus Stephan at the time had been working in Nigeria, located in Ibadan, for the Bavarian Broadcasting Service as a resident special correspondent, but covering Nigeria for the first German television program. And Taiwo Shango can be seen the culmination of his work, because he did that at the end of the period. After he finished the film, he moved on to Ethiopia. And it was produced for the Bavarian Broadcasting Corporation and the West German Broadcasting Corporation in what was then West Germany, in conjunction with Nigerian television service NTS. And you can see two of the three main important Nigerian persons on the film, namely Segun Olushola, who you can see to the right with the glasses and the cap, who was really the second most important person on the film as assistant producer, location manager, man on the ground, but also as one of the actors, because he plays Kehinde, the brother of Taiwo. Christopher Collade, you can see sitting in the car. Christopher Collade at the time was the head of programs at the Nigerian television service, but he also plays the protagonist Taiwo Shango. And then there was also Akine Uba, who was not on the picture. He worked in the background. He was responsible for the music in the film. So what we have is a feature film with a kind of fictional story, but what this film also contains are kind of ethnographic elements. And I would really say that the film has kind of two layers. So we have a layer that is the kind of the fictional story, but then we have people in the film who actually do whatever they do in their daily lives. So we have a quotidian, sorry, I never get the word right, the quotidian archive of the everyday, that contains, among other things, for example, ephemera body practices as archives of the everyday. It includes a musical archive or music as archive. And it might also, and it does also include what Toyin Falola has called the ritual archive in the film, because there are priests and elders in the film who really perform their roles. And I think that what makes the film special in many ways, but maybe there's also a controversial aspect to it. Stefan's idea was really, he had a leitmotif throughout these 5 years in Nigeria. And from a letter that he wrote to the director of programs at the beginning of the making of the film, and we do know that the director was Christopher Collade. So he writes to the director of programs and asks whether Mr. Christopher Collade and Mr. Segun Oloshola could please, permission, would he give permission for these two gentlemen to cooperate with him on this film project? Because, and that is the last bit that I've highlighted, because both gentlemen during the past 4 years have always been kind enough to encourage my work in Nigeria, which was and is directed to project Nigerian history and culture to a German audience. So we can see here where the film stands. You know, this film is made for a German television public, but he wants to present something, you know, that kind of reflects his own experience in Nigeria, you know, and what he thinks Nigerian history and culture is. Whether he succeeds or not, you know, we can discuss later. Taiwo Shango was shot on location in Nigeria, which I think is, even for today's standard, something highly unusual when it comes to German public broadcasting. And it was shot almost entirely with Nigerian actors. And you had really, you know, star actors on the film. The great Kola Ogunmola, then of course LSA and Segun Oloshola, Ralph Opara, and many others. The film was shown only once on the first German television program in the mid-December 1965, at a time that can be considered primetime television because it came right after the 8 o'clock news. And it was also meant to be shown on Nigerian television later and film festivals, but colleagues in Lagos have not been able to ascertain whether this actually happened. And what we know is that the film completely disappeared. You know, so no one spoke about it any longer. It was gone in the archives for many, many decades. So the film we are working with today is not the original film that was shot in Nigeria, because that was shot in English and in Yoruba, but it's the dubbed German version. And what we've done with the help of Oliver Stephan, the son of Klaus Stephan, was that we used the English shooting script that we have here at the Ivaleva House at Bayreuth, and kind of subtitled the film so that anybody who does not speak German can also follow the story. I should say, for those of you who are German speakers or who speak German and understand it, you will see that sometimes the subtitles and what is spoken is slightly different, because we decided not to translate the German dubbing script back into English. Okay. Now, from what I've already said, you will have realized that the film sits quite uneasily at the juncture of an emerging national Nigerian television service at the time, post-independence cultural production, and specifically in connection to Yoruba traveling theater, but also various other theater groups. And of course, the Mbari clubs, you know, as cultural kind of laboratories at the time, and their co-founder, Uli Bayer, who for Klaus Stephan was really a kind of a main contact person, you know, during his time in Nigeria. And I've already made a link to Stephan's journalistic output, but I think also that we're not going to do here in this session, link it to the work of his wife, Nina Fischer-Stephan, who was a photographer and filmmaker in her own right. And I would just like to mention that very shortly, at the beginning of July, there will be another open air installation at Tinubu Square. Some of you based in Lagos might have seen it last year. There was this big exhibition of Things Fall Apart, another film. And the same team will now prepare an exhibition of some of Nina Fischer-Stephan's work. And it's curated by Akinbode Akinbi last year. So what we have is a film at the interface of coloniality and post-coloniality. What is so controversial about the film, apart from all the things that I've already mentioned? I think what the film does is he makes controversial use of an historical incident in Oyo in the 1940s. And it's the same incident that Wole Soyinka also took as a starting point for his play, Death and the King's Horseman. You will remember that in the author's note to Death and the King's Horseman, Soyinka observes that the episode had, and I quote, already inspired a fine play in Yoruba by Duro Ladipo, namely Obawaja from 1964. And then he adds, but it has also misbegotten a film by some German television company, and that is Taiwo Shango. So we're really dealing with the misbegotten film here. There are other texts that also use this episode. I mean, Moses Olaya's Abobaku, for example, and you all know that B. Bandele finished the shooting of a Netflix production of Death and the King's Horseman at the end of last year. So, and I'm sure there is more. So I personally see Taiwo Shango as part of a wider historiographic initiative in the 1960s and 70s, which reimagined a certain historical event in the past for their own agendas and dramaturgies. But I think it's important to see Taiwo Shango as a concrete cultural manifestation of Pratt's contact zone, not necessarily in the sense of a strictly binary imperial encounter, but as an engagement of two national cultural industries with uneven power and production realities, which Segun Olusola also then mentioned in later writing. So this film construed and constructed a certain image and thus a certain knowledge of Africa. And we need to remember that it's essentially a European fiction, but I do think because of these various layers that the film indeed has, we think that it also imaginatively creates contemporaneous discourses of Nigerian everyday life that we can discuss here in the forum. And that includes gender and race relations, leisure activities, music productions, consumptions, and so on. And of course, also community practices. Now, our panel is geared towards engaging with these constructions at the interface of coloniality and early post-colonialities. And what we do is we will offer you sneak previews of selected scenes from the film. That is scheduled to be screened in Lagos, probably no longer in 2020, but somewhere in 2023. Now, I've nearly come to the end of my introduction. I will give you now a short synopsis of the film so that you will be able to follow the presentations better. And then I will finish off with a clip that I have chosen because I think it really nicely shows aspects of the everyday, you know, in kind of very brief succession and what the characters engage in. Now, we do have our protagonist, Taiwo Shango, who's a successful lawyer in Lagos and lives according to the tenet, work hard and play hard. And together with his partner, Patricia, who's played by Yinka Akerele, he moves among the stylish elite in this cosmopolitan city, which at the time, of course, was the capital of Nigeria. Now, in his hometown of Okeaja, Taiwo has responsibilities as the eldest son of the Otunba, played by the great Kola Ogunmola, who is a high-ranking elder and chief who holds an eminent traditional office and must fulfill certain obligations among the death of the local ruler. So while Taiwo studied abroad, his brother Kehinde, played by Olusola, remained at home to become the powerful administrator of Okeaja, supporting and advising the Otunba. So he's really the upholder of tradition in many ways. And of course, as happens between siblings, there are tensions and there are jealousies. Now, the Otunba wants Taiwo to marry Dr. Oju, who you can see here, played by Elsie Olusola, who's a doctor at the hospital in Okeaja, and she's in a relationship with Taiwo's best friend, Dr. Brian Murray, who is the European director of the clinic. Brian is caught unawares by this long-standing plan, and their relationship, Oju's and Brian's relationship, is further tested when Taiwo's father then is expected by some to die after the death of the ruler he has served. And when that eventually happens, Oju challenges Brian to protect the Otunba. And what happens then is Taiwo travels from Lagos to Okeaja to be with his family at this crucial time. And when the Otunba then fails to meet communal expectation, the town is thrown into disarray and Taiwo considers his options and obligations. And though he's deeply conflicted, he faces up to his responsibility, and I guess you can anticipate what that means. I just want to say one thing, because this person, it's a character that I have not introduced in the synopsis, but there's a third doctor in the clinic played by Ralph O'Para, and he's called Dr. Jameson, and it will feature in some of the other clips. And now I would like to show the first clip. So if the host could kindly just put the recording off. I hope this is going to work. Can you please stop the recording?
Machen, dass ein Menschenleben in deinen Augen etwas Heiliges ist?
Das kannst du ruhig glauben.
Also dann verstehe ich nicht, warum du dem Otumba nicht helfen willst. Weil du und deine Philosophie ebenso falsch und
Sorry, can we just stop the recording because the recording has started again? No recording of the film clips, please. Sorry.
Performance. Finally, I want to note the significance of this film as an ethnographic project, functioning as an archive and as a means of representing the everyday life in the immediate post-colonial Nigerian environment. Ethnography manifests in many different ways in the film, not only in the apparent insider-outsider cooperation that enabled its production, but more importantly, through the pervading emphasis on the performance of culture in the enactment of the cinematic narrative. Indeed, the unfolding process of the story often seems to slow down in deference to the performance of culture. Royal power is celebrated, traditional customs are articulated, and rituals are enacted to demonstrate the structural relationships that hold the Yoruba society together. All these serve to highlight the performance of culture as an observable and dynamic tradition within a clearly defined Yoruba physical and cultural space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bode, and also thank you to James and Ono for your very, very insightful papers. I would also like to thank the host, for not recording the bits where we actually showed the clips. Thank you very much for that. And we have very little time left. There are only 14 minutes. And I would kindly now ask the people in the audience, to ask questions. And I would reckon, I've not been giving any instructions, and to be honest, it's the first time I'm hosting a webinar rather than a seminar on Zoom. So I think that what you can do is you can just post your questions and comments in the chat. That should be possible. Nothing is happening. I have now been able to see. I can now see everybody in the room. Is here as an audience rather than as a presenter. Maybe, to get the discussion going, really, I've not really prepared a question, but going back to Bode, we did have another clip, that showed another nightclub scene that features Fela Kuti in the film, and which we were unable to show again because of copyright issues. And maybe Bode, I can just kindly ask you to maybe remark on it, make a comment or two about that film, and then I would hand back to James and Ono,
Yes, it's the scene that features Fela Kuti is in Lagos, so away from the relatively rural setting of Okeaja. And it's in a nightclub, and you have all the elite members of Lagos gathered together. But what is striking for me is the fact that the music that Fela played at that time is Afrobeat. It's actually in the big band American jazz tradition, which therefore is closer to the early beginnings of his career, and away yet from the emergence of his Afrobeat style. So again, it draws attention to the process of how cultures are produced. I remember it's Chris Waterman who says that this kind of new musical practices that we have in Africa speak to the role of African musicians as culture producers, because they are creating something that is completely new. So at that point in time, Fela was yet to evolve his trademark Afrobeat style.
Thank you very much, Bode. I would now like to invite Ono and James maybe for some final comments, because it does not look as if we get questions from the audience. It's also quite late, at least in the Northern Hemisphere where I'm based. And I mean, what I could do is, I'm very much tempted, because I have now realized that I know practically everyone in the room who's watching us, but for one person I could just ask whether this person has a question, but I think it's probably better if we do a final round of final comments, from the presenters. So Ono, I would like you to start, and then we'll finish with James. Thank you.
My reading of this film is kind of always, it's
or three other.
Sorry, my reading of this film has always been biased towards showing Ka's own version of the story, actually. And I often question the very idea that two creators using the same material arrive at two different things. Klaus Stefan doing this and recreating the story in such a way that he wants to give the impression, so to speak, that the problem of the Otumba actually is not within the Otumba himself. Now, doing graduate work at the University of Ibadan will train to think that the problem is with the Otumba himself. It's an internal problem. So seeing this film actually made me realize that we were taught in a very particular way, which is not good, that we should be open to all kinds of interpretation. And I've always said it, that interpretation of cultures must be done not just by those who take it for granted because they are part of that culture, but also by those for whom the culture may just be uncommon. And so my use of the word uncommon becomes really, really, for me, very, very wonderful. But finally, the one thing that I wanted to really happen in my interpretation of this script is to say that Klaus Stefan was able to use those two cinematic modes, the feature and the documentary, in a way that moved away from the normal run of things for these kinds of films, okay? So non-diegetic sound, the sound outside the film time. My interpretation is to say that it's very true. It doesn't force you to read the action in a specific way, but just comments upon the action, just as the Greek chorus, for instance, who comment on the actions at the Acropolis, right? And that, for me, it's really, really important, because in other kinds of documentary films that we've seen over these in the 19th century, early 20th century about African cultures. Those documentary films are rendered in such a way that they teach us, they tell us about our culture. But this one does not do that, but present it as neutral as possible. And it is the non-diegetic aspect of the film that actually makes this readable, at least to me. And I find it really interesting in that regard. This is one of the things that draws me to the film, and I'm likely to use it and teach it if I'm in the opportunity to do that again and again, because it's a good example of a film that takes the local culture seriously.
Thank you very much, Ono. And I'll hand over to James for a final comment.
Thank you very much. In reading about this film, been fascinated by the legacy, the down-to-earth legacy of the filmmakers. What happened to the cameras when they left? What about their tape recorders? What about their lighting equipment? I know that Frank Steed and Doig Simmons, who were involved in filmmaking at the University of Ibadan, for example, were able to benefit from the kit that was left behind. And I think that's a fascinating legacy. It's a practical legacy, but there is also a filmmaking legacy that my colleagues have spoken about. It was also a legacy for Shango Olushola, who in the interviews in the period following the making of the film constantly referred back to what he had learned in the process of making the film. Towards the end of his life, we know that he was very anxious to recover the film, share it, and have it more widely seen. And I think that's a fascinating development. But finally, I would say that one of the interesting things about prostration is that in Ake, Shoenka talks about going to Ishara as perhaps a 6-year-old boy, and the Odemo was told that the schoolmaster's children do not prostrate. And many of the elders were rather shocked at this and called out the young Shoenka, who then replied, and of course he's telling the story, so you'd expect him to have all the best lines. He said, "I don't prostrate to God, so why should I prostrate to you?" And he claims that this was an improvised remark, not something that he had thought about before. So I think that elements in this film, and I think it's absolutely fascinating to hear about the music and to get the ethnography in order. Elements of this film move out in all kinds of directions. That's why it's so rich. That's why it's worth looking at. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. I think there's nothing for me to end on this wonderful note that you have ended. I would like to thank everybody in the room, especially our audience, for participating in this panel. Thank you very much to Kali Kotsia for her kind comments in the chat. And I hope that I'll be able to see you again very soon, and that we can continue our discussion of Taiwo Shango, which I think is indeed a very rich source to be explored. And with that, I would like to hand back to our LSA host and thank him or her for their patience, especially with my special requests. So thanks a lot.